Hello there, I'm Ron Lemon, and this is Level Up with Lemonade, a side mission, episode 4. We will be continuing on with the Bridgman's Definitive Guide to Drawing from Life. We will be looking at the arms, the legs, and the feet. The next video coming, episode 5, will be entirely devoted to the hands. This particular part of the book, or these chapters of the book, are really difficult chapters. The writing and the pictures don't really go together in some sections, and there isn't any writing for a lot of the other pages. It's more of a compilation of images. So there was some heavy thinking that I had to do with some of these sections. They were very difficult to parse what he was trying to accomplish within certain pages or certain drawings within the section. But I tried to do the best I could, and hopefully you'll get enough information from it that these chapters are also useful for you to study from. Some of the muscle names are completely changed now from when Bridgman was teaching. If you're looking through the guide and you're reading some of the muscles, you'll maybe note, if you do know muscle names, that I don't know these muscles because, well, they just aren't named that anymore, but they are still the same muscles. There aren't any new muscles. It's just that the terminology has been updated and changed for modern times. All right, there's a lot to parse here. I do my best. I am a little under the weather when I'm recording these videos, so I'm a bit nasally, but it's still information. Hopefully you can get through it just as much as I had to get through it to figure out what was going on within those chapters. All right, let's go ahead and get started. The line drawn along here is the pectoralis through the deltoid. The line along here is the latissimus. The way that he's drawn this and shaded it, it is how we would see light fall on an arm if the light was coming from this direction. This is the division between the front of the bicep and the side plane of the bicep. So everything along here is bicep, brachialis, coracobrachialis, and tricep as we see them through the arm. This is the epicondyle that he mentions here. We don't see the one on the other side because it's covered up by the rotation muscle. However, it's where the little hole is underneath that muscle. Hopefully we'll see that here shortly in another image. Then we have the forearm and the rotation muscles together here with its side plane in shadow and the top surfaces in the light. This little triangular space right here is where the bicep wedges in between them, and that is the cubital fossa or fossa. It's the place where the tendon of the bicep wedges between this group of muscles here and this one over here and attaches to the radius bone. Then as we get to the wrist, the line that's right here doesn't intersect or insert into the thumb. It's actually going through this and then connecting to the palm over here. But the way that it's been drawn is to show that we have a block this way for the wrist, a block this way for the forearm muscles, a block this way for the bicep tricep group, and the deltoid again is like a block that goes like this, except we don't see the shadow side because that's where it merges with the torso. But it's this interlocking set of shapes, very similar to a more modern way of defining this, which is the chain link, where we see the interlocking links. But the interlocking links alternate between wide and narrow, which is exactly the way the arm is when the wrist is in the reference point or neutral position between pronation and supination, somewhere right in between the two. And here's his description with a bit more graphic clarity. Only this time now the wrist is rotated in this direction, but he's still showing that there is a distinction between these blocky masses between each one in the hierarchy chain of the arm. And he's showing this as a first point before it's covered up by the blocks and then fleshed over. He's also showing that there is a angular relationship between each of these, a visual rhythm between each of the different components as we look at them in their chain. And then his backside of the arm, or the posterior side of the arm. In this first description, we have the bones in pronation. This band right here represents the bicep as it intersects the deltoid, which is this rhythm line that goes up and over. Now, visually speaking, he's lining things up in a way that I'm not really sure if I've ever seen these types of rhythms in an actual arm, but he is pushing things a little bit as far as design goes. Now, remember that this is the Industrial Revolution. The body's a machine, but he's still building this machine with this visual rhythm, this rhythmical clarity to it, which gives a more beautiful definition to all of the different shapes. He's pushing the rhythm, he's pushing the interlocking, and the way that they're coming together is this visual flow that makes everything move together in harmony with one another. I think that's one of the bigger takeaways of Bridgman. As much as it looks mechanical, when it comes to the design part of it, it's far superior than just copying what you see. If you push these rhythms into it, then you're pushing things in the same way that Michelangelo would. Michelangelo, if you look at a lot of the paintings that he did, especially on the Sistine Chapel, there's anatomy that shouldn't even be there. It's for the sake of rhythm and flow that he's pushing those things. It's not for copying's sake. It's for storytelling, and the eye needs to flow through the form. Bridgman is also showing that very thing with the rhythms that he's pushing. He's stylizing the muscles, but he's showing us that there's a block shape across here, then it turns to tendon, then it turns to this rounded form, then it turns to block again. And he's really pushing each one of these shapes. And then he's also showing us the geometry that changes when the arm is flexed and the hand is flexed. Now we see an arm that's fleshed over. But even in these instances, like this ulna bone along in here, he's really pushing the size of the shape. He's pushing it more than the size actually is. And ulna bone isn't that large, but by pushing the division, it's separating the flexors from the extensors further. Geometrically speaking, we can see things more clearly and more easily. This is a bit more realistic here. We see a part of the ulna bone here. We see it again back in here, and the extensor group is passing over it slightly, covering or hiding a bit of the portion of the bone. He's also pushing each of these joints with much more visual clarity. In addition, he is creating these really strong curvilinear overlaps. This is something that we should pay attention to as far as the design goes. Frank Frazetta was one who he didn't study with Bridgman, but he used the Bridgman book to learn anatomy. If we look at a lot of the Frazetta paintings, he's pushing things much harder and much further than the human body actually has. He would take his photo reference and embellish it and push this Bridgman-esque rhythm and flow into his work. And it worked amazingly well. The design that he crafted in the muscles of his heroes was phenomenal. These muscles right here are very much like that. He's stylizing things. Here's the epicondyle, so he's pushing that further. He's pushing the shapes in each of these different distinct muscle groups so that they're visually clear. He's alternating between curvilinear and rectilinear rhythms. He's strengthening and pushing the tendon sizes much larger than they need to be as well, or that they are as well. But again, it's for the sake of design, making the picture read with more vitality, more strength in the machination of the parts than if we were to copy a photograph, especially with somebody who might not be as built. And we're going to push these muscles, but they're going to feel inferior rather than superior in the shape. So the idea is with Bridgman, once again, to learn the machination portion of this, learn the design language of this, and then inject that into our own work. Russian artists do this. If you look at a lot of the drawings from the Russian Academy, they push things. They push things to the point of this beautiful orchestration of muscles, regardless of the age or the weight of the model that they're drawing. They're pushing these to create more vitality, more life in their drawing. And that's exactly what Bridgman was pushing in the work that he was training people with. Here again, we can see the ulna bone cutting through the forearm. And then he's very clearly defining the side plane from the front plane, which means that he's probably pushing the shadow patterns as well. Depending upon which direction the light might be coming from on the model, he's going to take some of those surfaces and embellish shadows because he wants the design to read more than the one-to-one accuracy of realism, which eventually we get to, but it's stylized realism. Now on this page, he's showing the bone structure, and he's being very clear that each of these has volume. Each of these has a side and a front, and he's pushing all of these designs more block-like than the bones are actually more cylindrical. There's one thing, though, that we have to be really careful of, and over here and here and here, he's pushing the radius bone over to the side of the arm. But what I think he's really trying to show is the interaction of these bones in their pronation and their supination. The radius is actually connected right here, as you'll see in the next set of drawings. The bone, both the radius and the ulna bone, are connected right in here between the epicondyles of the arm, not off to the side. But because this drawing is articulating the pronation versus the supination, the design has been pushed a little bit as well within the bone structure. Here we can see this is the bump that the radius bone is connected to, and this is the spool shape that the ulna bone is connected to, and they are sitting between the epicondyles. Now this drawing over here is a little bit funky, but what we're seeing here and here is actually how this muscle here comes up and attaches here, how both of these muscles attach right here. This is the coracoid process on the scapula. And this is the glenoid cavity of the scapula. And that's where the bicep and the coracoid process attach. Number 1 is the coracobrachialis. Number 2 is the bicep. Number 3 is the brachialis that sits under the bicep. Number 4 is the pronator teres, and that's attached here and comes over here to the radius bone, as he's showing. The flexor group coming from this epicondyle and going into the palm of the hand. And then number 6, he's calling the supinator longus, which is actually the brachioradialis. That's the name of the muscle now. This might have been the name long ago, but we now call it the brachioradialis. And that's coming from up here along this bone and then attaching to the wrist over here. And then there's a little bit of a description here that explains the muscles a little bit further. But in the anatomy descriptions, they are a little bit long-winded. Not to put them down because they're very accurate, but I think you can get more visually looking at the bone structure than trying to crunch through some of the descriptions and understand the setup of the muscles. Just remember that every muscle has an origin point and then has an insertion, which I don't think was a labeling system as of yet when Bridgman wrote this book. But every muscle has an origin and an insertion. And when we look at anatomy books now, that's how they're written: origin, insertion, and it explains where the origin is and where the insertion is, which shorthands all the verbiage that Bridgman is using within these chapters. On this page, we're looking at a few things. We're looking at the fleshed over arm with some interesting extra rhythms here, some interesting extra rhythms in here. But we're also looking at the bicep and how the bicep attaches to the radius here. The bicep here, the brachioradialis here, with the wrist in this particular position. So all of these examples are with the wrist pronated. These are swinging over towards the now medial side where the radius has been rotated to. This is the tendon. This is the muscle. This is the ulna bone through here. And this is the extensor carpi radialis longus. Here again, the bicep with its cubital fossa, and then the tendon that wraps around the flexors, which we will see this again when it comes to the mechanism of the arm. We'll see it on that page, and I'll point these things out. Here the muscles again have been cut away, and here are the tendinous portions of those muscles. So the way he was describing the muscles is a big rope that is covered over with muscle. And every now and again, he'd shear away the muscle group so that you could see the tendon coming from the bulk of the muscle. You'll see that quite a lot, both in the arms and the leg chapters. He does that quite often with the muscles. Here's a different angle of the same kind of rotation. Here is the arm supinated. Here is the arm pronated, or getting closer to pronation. The palm is facing upward. Tendons, muscle mass, tendons, bicep, brachialis, tricep group. The coracobrachialis, I believe, is this little wedge right up along in here. I could be wrong on that, but that's where the coracobrachialis is positioned in the arm. But again, when we're looking at these designs, they're not very easy to understand if you don't relate to how he's cutting away portions of the muscles and exposing the tendons or showing the bones underneath all of this. They're not color-coded, they're just drawn in. And so everything kind of blends together visually, making it a little bit more difficult to articulate what's taking place. Unfortunately, this scan, the page is curled over, but number one is the tricep back along in here. And then this is the humerus that it's sitting on top of. Then the deltoid, which is sort of clear. We can see through the deltoid into the inner workings. Side plane of the deltoid, posterior plane of the deltoid. Then we have again, he's calling it supinator longus, but this is the brachioradialis muscle. And then the extensor carpi radialis longus. So extensor side, radialis, carpi is the carpal bones. So it's attaching to the wrist. The extensor group, which down here he's labeling all the different muscles within that group. The extensor digitorum, the extensor digiti minimi, the extensor carpi ulnaris, which is attached to the ulna bone, and then the anconeus, a small muscle that goes from right here over to here. And he's showing us this spread over here, which is the width that it's attached to. Just like over here, the brachioradialis is attached along here and then connects to the wrist right here. The extensor carpi radialis longus is attached right here and connects up here. Over here, we have the tricep group. So the tricep is attached here. It's attached along in here. This is the head that sits underneath. And then the head that sits on top is attached over here, and they all connect to this point right here at the back of the ulna bone, which we will look at in the coming pages where he breaks down the anatomy of the arm. Starting with this page, he does a rotation of the arm, a front, a back, a medial, and a lateral take of the upper arm. In this case, we're looking at the anterior side between these three images. And then in this one, he's showing it in profile, but he's showing the connection points for the bicep muscle. And I believe what we're looking at here is the arm in a extended, flexed, and even more flexed position, which is this arm right here. In this case, we're looking at the bones. We're looking at part of the scapula, the coracoid process, the acromion process, the glenoid cavity, the humerus, the connection point where the ulna bone attaches, and then the radius. Right here and here are the 2 points that these bones attach to. And sitting over that, over here we have the coracoid process, over here we have the coracoid muscle, and here we have the brachialis, and the way that they are connected to the humerus. And then sitting over the top of that, we can see the bicep. The bicep and the coracoid muscle are both connected over here. and the other half of the bicep is coming up and attaching to the glenoid cavity on the scapula. And then what we're seeing here and over here are hints of the brachialis underneath the bicep. And then here's all those muscles again fleshed over, which you can still see a hint of the brachialis along in here, the bicep covering it here, then the brachioradialis, the forearm flexors, back along through here, the tricep, and along here is the coracobrachialis. Or it might be the tendon of the bicep, but they're both following the same rhythm line. From the front view, you may not see the coracobrachialis as easily since it sits underneath the bicep, but they both follow the same pathway. And then his descriptions of each page, which you should read, but they are, I think, a little bit more wordy than are actually needed to discuss how the muscles are connected. But one thing that is important is his description and understanding of how the muscles contract in that contraction that he's calling it, or the flexing of the muscle, that the muscle works. See, every muscle only flexes. They don't flex and extend, they only flex. That's why we have opposing muscles. We have 2 heads of the bicep area. We have 3 heads of the tricep. The tricep works in opposition of the bicep to extend and flex the arm, as do all the other muscles within the arms, the legs, and the torso. They're working in opposition to create the different directions of movement that our body takes, which is something that you will get from this reading. But as far as the descriptions of the muscles, where their origin and insertion are on the bones, can be a little bit wordy. And so I would basically take this book and cross-reference it with something a little more modern, and you'll get a complete understanding of what's going on with the human machine. The posterior side, which is all tricep, it's the only muscle we have on the back side of the arm. So again, the humerus, the joint that's connected to the scapula, the ulna bone. And this is right along here where the tricep is attached. The tricep connects along this part of the scapula over here, and then the third head sits underneath here, which he doesn't draw and we don't see very often in any art book because it's sort of buried by these 2 muscle heads which dominate the back space. But we will see a hint of it on both sides, along over here and over here. But the bulk of what he's showing us are the lateral and the medial heads. And then again, the same thing but fleshed over with his stylized rhythms and stylized design to break up the muscles with even more visual clarity. And then this one is showing it's the way that the elbow bends. It's on a hinge joint, and this is the hinge up here, not down here. The ulna bone goes past the hinge joint. Where the epicondyles are of the arm, that's the actual hinge joint. And then the ulna bone extends, especially if the arm is flexed, it's going to extend downward, creating a triangular relationship between the 2 epicondyles and the ulna bone. When the arm is straight, all of these form a straight line. This point right here comes up and lines up with the epicondyles, so we don't see that triangle anymore. And then again, his descriptions of what we're looking at from the posterior view. Then we have the lateral view with the lateral view descriptions. On the lateral side, the acromion process, the head of the humerus, the length of the humerus, right here is where the deltoid attaches, and then the mechanism of the hinge joint. All of this part is swung forward. This is the point right along in here that the ulna bone rotates around. And then this is the ball joint for the radius. We're looking at the arm flexed and extended. Tricep is all of this back here. This is the deltoid. This is the bicep. This is the brachialis muscle, the brachioradialis, extensor carpi radialis longus, and the extensor group. And then all of that fleshed over here where the muscles aren't overtly designed, and yet they are, because Bridgman is designing everything with visual clarity. Here is that little groove that I was mentioning earlier, right along in here, where you'll see the other epicondyle. On the medial side of the arm, the epicondyle sticks outward, but on this side, it's where the hollow is of our arm, right along in here in the muscles. And they sit directly across from one another. And that is the breaking point between the lower arm and the upper arm. And here we have the medial side. And its page of descriptions he calls the inner view. I don't know if medial, lateral, posterior, and anterior were words yet during this time, but we're not seeing a lot of those words being used. He's using a slightly different vocabulary, just like some of the names of the muscles are different then than they are now, like the brachioradialis. So on this medial side, we have the bicep, which again is here, and that's what this is right along in here. This is the tricep down here. This is the rotation muscle, the brachioradialis, the flexor group, the ulna bone, which he's drawn very large, the extensor group. Brachioradialis, flexors, bicep, which he's drawing through these muscles here, and they're attached back in here, but he's showing the tendon. This is the tendon that wraps around the flexor group. The brachialis on the medial side, the coracobrachialis, and the tricep back along in here. And then his fleshed over version here, which it doesn't really look fleshed over. He's just shaded it a little bit. You can still see the divisions of all of those muscles. One thing that I've noted in more modern books is that they say that these are running right up into one another. There might be a stacking order between them, but they basically run into the same point along the arm, where he's saying that one is clearly wedged over the top of the other. I'll have to look at some more books to see if that is the case, but a lot of the more modern books have both of these running right up into one another. Now here is his conversation about the contraction of muscles. He's using the word contraction, we use the word flexing. How when the bicep flexes, this is its only function, and it pulls the upper arm this way. The tricep is the muscle that works in opposition of that. Here he's showing the different heads of the tricep and the tendon. It's sort of just all jumbled together, but it's not important that you see a clear definition of the muscle. It's more important that you understand that these are working in opposition of one another to flex and extend the arm. And this is the page that I was describing earlier, the mechanisms of the arm. Here he's drawing the bicep and showing us the tendon that wraps around the flexors. It's sort of a pulling tendon, right? It wraps around those muscles, but it helps to pull the forearm upward towards the shoulder. And then here is that same muscle, but with the arm in a pronated state. So the tendon is now over on this side rather than it being over on this side. He's doing the same thing over here. He's showing that muscle in a pronated state as opposed to it being in a supinated state. And here it is in the supinated state. Coracobrachialis with the bicep tendon. And I don't know what this is right here. He was probably starting a drawing but didn't finish it or moved it down to some other location. This is the platform. This platform that he's drawing is supposed to be the deltoid mass, or the start of the deltoid mass. The humerus bone comes up to right here. And then he's showing the platform, probably the top of the shoulder, with these connecting into this platform or into the scapula. But in many of these designs, he's creating a shorthand for parts of the body, and then he focuses on the one particular area. And he's using this shorthand as a way of describing certain actions for this part of the body. These don't matter to him. It's more about describing how the bicep is split up here to create more strength out of it, having both of these tendons on either side of the humerus to create more stability when it's flexing the arm, since that is the function of the arm, is to flex and lift things up. We have to have muscles distributed in a different way to help support the weight that we lift. And then he's showing the mechanism of how that muscle is attached to the forearm and how it pulls on it to flex the forearm up to the shoulder. This section of the book goes over the forearm. Now, in this first page, it's the description of the second page, which is this one right here. And what it's describing is the arm in different states. We have the flexor side, then we have the extensor side in both of these, and then as well the forearm flexed. So, and it's describing how the hand is in position with the rest of the arm and how the arm is in position with the upper arm. The first drawing on the flexor side shows the flexor group. So there's a few different muscles here. We have the flexor palmaris, which would be this one here, and that terminates in the palm. Then we have the flexor digitorum, which is all of the flexor muscles. And then next to that is the flexor carpi ulnaris, and that anchors to the wrist. Now, there's also a flexor carpi radialis, which is over on this side that he didn't draw. And both of those anchor to both of these bones to help flex the hand in this particular position right here. In this position, he's really exaggerated the ulna bone. He's made it a lot larger than it actually needs to be. On this side, we have the flexor group, and on this side, we have the extensor group. Then over here and down here, we're looking at the extensor side. We're looking at the brachioradialis, the extensor carpi radialis longus, because he didn't draw the brevis. The thumb muscles, both of these are extenders for the thumb. And then we have the extensor group. We have over here the flexor group that sits next to it. The ulna bone is right along through here, dividing the two sides from one another. And then here he's showing, and over here he's showing the extensor carpi radialis and the extensor carpi ulnaris in action. When they extend the hand upward, how all of these muscles activate and become a much stronger rhythm on the top of the arm, where when the flexor group is working, all of those rhythms are more expanded on the bottom of the arm. And this side becomes a bit more relaxed, as he calls it. One side relaxes while the other side contracts. Here, he's showing the extensor muscles as they're doing this action right here. This represents the hand. And this is the ulnaris and the radialis pulling the hand back or flexing, causing the hand to lift in this particular direction. Then he uses a similar routine with the forearm as he does with the upper arm by showing us the forearm in different views and explaining the bones and the muscles. Now, the one thing, these bones do not flow together like this. They actually work in contrast to each other. They both do this to one another, and there's a gap that sits in between where the thumb muscles come from. The thumb muscles are anchored along the inside edge along here. This would not be parallel to one another at all. There would be a larger gap. So that is something of a discrepancy in the way that he has done this drawing. And this doesn't float either. Those bones are well connected together. He's drawn that bone floating in a lot of different images, and I'm not really sure the reason why that bone was drawn that way. But it does seem to be kind of trademark with him when he draws those bones in throughout the chapter, that those bones seem to hover or have a distance between one another. Now, along in here, this is the same view as this right here. It's showing the flexor side of the arm. Here is the brachioradialis muscle as it's attaching to the wrist. Then we have the pronator teres here, which attaches to the radius bone. Then we have all of the flexor group, which includes the flexor superficialis, the palmaris, the flexor ulnaris muscles, all grouped together here, minus the flexor radialis muscle. But he has the other muscles grouped together. This one isn't as dominant as he's drawn, and the bicep wedging in here sort of buries it a little bit more, but he's showing the distinction between these because this is his lecture on the forearm. So he's going to heighten or overemphasize these muscles on purpose to show their design structure. Then he's simplified these muscles down a little further. This is the way that, so this muscle sort of curls around, and then this is the underside and this is the outside of it. And he's showing that in the design here. This is cradled by the bicep and the brachialis muscles. It sort of wraps around those muscles. Then we have the pronator teres and the flexor group. And what he's done here is he's cut away a portion of the muscles to show the tendons and how they actually, in a way, I don't know if he's actually cutting the muscle away or not. I think what he's doing is he's showing that the bulk of the muscle is operated by the tendon. And the tendon is this strong rope that cuts through the muscle mass. And that's how he draws these particular types of muscles with tendons. Then over here is the arm completely fleshed over, and some of the muscles that you might see in somebody who's taking a pose. The side plane over here, the top plane along here, and then the wrist is wedged in this direction. So it is not completely wrist up. It's somewhere in between, almost at reference. Reference sits in between pronation and supination. And this is in reference, but at the same time, he's also extending the hand, which is causing this muscle to sharpen more. In addition to all the extensors that would be on the other side, they would be a little bit sharper as well. And then finally in this section, we're looking at the forearm extensor group. And these are the descriptions of the different muscles, or the four different drawings on this page. And here are the 4 different drawings. The radius bone, the ulna bone, the back of the arm, the elbow, the humerus bone. And again, he's drawn these bones against each other, which they don't do. There's actually a gap that goes this way. Part of his design philosophy, I'm assuming, because I know that he would be looking at a skeleton at that point, but he's done it in such a way where he's brought these bones together for design purposes. Then we have all of the different muscles, the brachioradialis, the extensor carpi radialis longus, the extensor carpi radialis brevis, the thumb muscles, the thumb extensor muscles, then the extensor group, and the extensor ulnaris, the ulna bone, and then the flexor group sitting on the other side. Then he's bundled them and stylized or cut away a portion of the muscle right here to show the tendons. Although this is a bit deceptive because the extensor group has 4 different heads with 4 different tendons that come out of those heads. He might be generalizing here. Again, I don't quite understand the design philosophy behind this cross section, but what I think he's doing is once again showing that the muscle, it's kind of like a piston, right? We have the piston body, and then we have the pump for the piston, which is going to be this ramrod, this thinner bar, and he's doing that very thing with the muscles. Now remember, again, he's machinating the human form, so this might actually be what he's doing with those muscles to show their action, that this is sort of like a piston. It contracts and it extends. When it extends, then this lengthens, but when it's flexed, it shortens up the muscle head. It makes it a shorter, stronger looking muscle head. And it does look like from this drawing that he's drawing the hand extended as well, which is going to cause these to sharpen. The tricep, as how he draws it, with this really hard tendon along in here, the ulna bone through here, the flexor group, and then the supination muscles over on this side with their sharp design where they insert into the humerus bone. And then above that, the bicep and the brachialis group, but just a small portion of them because, again, his focus is on this particular part of the arm. This section of the arms is a little bit interesting because he starts off with this really good conversation about masses of the shoulders and the arms, but then it devolves into the elbow. And some of those masses blend together because of his diagrams of the arms in those particular positions. So we'll look at those shortly. But this is that chain that I was talking about earlier, very clearly designed here. Here's the chain link going this way. Here's the chain link going this way. Or let me draw the arrow in the other direction, this way. So this is across, and this is in perspective. This is across, and this is in perspective or foreshortened. So this, then this, then this, then this. is the way that it's designed. And here he's showing how they wedge into one another. And he does describe that wedging taking place right over in here, how those muscle groups wedge into one another in the same way that these links overlap one another. This is basically wedging into this, like this is wedging into this, and so forth. That's exactly how these muscle groups and bones are also working in relationship to each other in the design of the arm. And more examples from various angles of the arm with the light on them. And here you can really see the chain link at work, right? You can really see those intersections. And these are the wedging shapes that he's talking about, along with this right here, the wedging of the wrist into the hand block, the wedging of the shoulder into the bicep tricep group, the wedging of the ridge muscles or the rotation muscles, and the flexor group into the bicep group, and so forth. Then with it in various angles to show how that wedging works between the blocks. And this is a very stylized version, but at the same time, you can still achieve this look regardless of the stylization, just as long as you remember that these muscles overlap one another and they're not just all sitting right next to each other like this, but literally sliding these into each other now makes them more complex and more interconnected. This is what I was talking about with it starts getting a little bit clunky. If we're talking about the difference between those chain links, then here he's broken that because he's sort of blended them into one another. But here is the deltoid mass as it comes down and intersects the tricep on the back and the bicep brachialis on the front. Here he has the supination muscles wedging into here and overlapping this group right here, which we can see the extensor group along here, the top block of the wrist and the side block over here. The same thing here. This is the side plane. This is the bottom side. And actually, I'm drawing those lines in the wrong direction. This is going away from us. So the side plane and the underside, side plane and the underside. Extensor group being wedged by the rotation muscles, wedged between the tricep and the bicep, and the deltoid is wedged in between those. And now we're just looking at elbows. He has the bones of the elbow here. Then he's showing those bones geometrically over here, and then a more elegant drawing over here of those same muscles and the way that the elbow is wedged in between those different muscle groups. Here we have the bone wedged by the extensors and the flexors and the tricep up here. So that is what he's showing, is the wedging of the elbow as it's intersecting these shapes and as this shape is grown around it. But without any descriptions around here, we wouldn't know what this section represents at all because there is no conversation for it. This is basically all of the information that we get. Wedging of arm into forearm at the elbow. That's it. But at least he gives us something that we can follow, this roadmap right here, showing us the bicep group, the triceps here, 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 and back over here, the brachioradialis here, 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 over here, here, and this muscle right in here. The flexor group, which is in this image here and this image over here, and then the extensor group, which is this and this, and a hint of it right here. The flexor group, a hint of it over here. But he's cut away the rest of the forearm and taken away the torso so that he can show us this particular side of the arm and the way the muscles wedge around the elbow. It would be nice, though, if there was a little bit more of a description of this side of the arm, just so we have something to reaffirm what we're looking at. But that is basically what we're looking at in this particular position. In this section of the arms, he is describing the pronation and supination of the arm. He's turned the wrist into a circle to kind of show, and I'm sure that he would probably have more drawings that would show the placement of the radius and the ulna, and then in a completely different position to each other and in a different position to each other, like so, showing the full rotation on the circular plane. This is like my older description of the front of the wrist being like a prop on an airplane, and you're just basically taking the prop and rotating it into whichever position you need to, and then building out the block of the wrist from there to design the rest of the forearm. But this gives us a sense of the width of the wrist, the thickness of the wrist, and the position of the wrist in pronation, supination, or somewhere in between. Pronator teres is the opposition muscle to the brachioradialis. Those two muscles are the two that are working against one another, flexing and extending against each other to help pronate and supinate the wrist. Here we can see full pronation with the two muscles. This one is underneath, this one is over the top. And over here, if we want to call this parallel, that's sort of what they're doing, is in the palm up version, we're going to have both of these separated from each other and not overlapping like we do over here. And this is just a design variant of how the supination muscle sits when the wrist is pronated. It has sort of an S-curve rhythm to it as it spins around. Now, again, he's removed the flexors and the extensors because these are the only two muscles he's showing us for this particular action. And here we have some more, a little bit easier to read variations of this. Again, the circular wrist to show the bones rotating in different positions for pronation and for supination, and how those two muscles, or in some cases, because we only see one of them, how they play visually with the arm as the arm is in these various positions. So here we have the supination position, and we can see the muscles, both of them at the same time. But then with pronation, all we can see is the brachioradialis. The other muscle is on the other side of the arm. The same thing is taking place between this one and this one over here. Here we can see, or actually no, we can't see it over here because we're looking at the elbow side on both instances. But he's showing us how the muscle rotates and so this is in a pronated position and the muscle stays along the length of the bone. But then in pronation, it rotates around. The only problem with this is that he has this muscle on the wrong side of the arm. See, these bones should actually be in front of it, and we see this passing around it. So this is not actually a very good example. If you were to copy this, you would be putting the muscle on the wrong side of the arm. The bones should be sitting over the top of this, and this is passing behind the bones. Do remember that a lot of the drawings that are in this book are student drawings. So that's probably the case here, that the student forgot to erase the muscle through those bones to show that the bones are overlapping it. In this section, he's showing the bones of the elbow. He has this design over here, something that we want to pay attention to, because in other drawings later on in this section, he really pushes this design, but over off to the side. So he removes all of this, and he shows us the wheel on the side of the arm instead. Here is his floating radius bone one more time. I think if he was to draw those together, we wouldn't have a very good understanding of what we're looking at. So I think that they're separated out for us to visually understand what we're looking at. Here we see the elbow flexed. He's showing us how this is wedging into the bone that sticks out along in here, how it fits into this little groove right here to rotate around in the elbow space. And again, a disconnection of this, although this would be right up against that particular bump. Here is the elbow extended and flexed. He's showing us that there's a little notch that's cut into the bone, although we don't see that notch because it's covered by the side plane of it. He's showing us that little notch to help us understand that that's how the ulna bone sits within the humerus. within the cross-section portion. This is a cross-section of the bone, just like this is a cross-section of this bone. The ulna bone is designed like this, and the cross-section of the humerus comes out like this on both sides of the shaft. These form the epicondyles, which this one over here is a little bit more notched. Then the bone that sticks outward here, but then sitting directly behind that is a hollow space right through here. So when we look at that bone from the back view, it's like this. It has a notch cut out in it, but we can see that other segment in the front of the notch, like so. And this is the little pocket that this part of the ulna bone fits into when the arm is extended. Now, when the arm is extended, or when the arm is flexed rather, the tricep tendon sits over the top of all of this. But when the arm is extended, the tricep tendon is attached to this corner right here. But it might look like it's attached to the back of the entire arm because it rests over the platform of this bone when the bone is flexed. Here's a cross section. We can see the bones sitting underneath all the muscles. And he's done this on purpose to show us how this bone relates to these muscles in here. It sort of cuts through in a diagonal sort of way between the masses of the flexor group and the rotation muscles and extensor muscles, and how this muscle sits underneath the tricep head. It also has a slight diagonality to it within that structure. And then here is the spool that the ulna bone rotates around, and here is an example of the ulna bone connected to the spool. And here is his more organic version of it, although it doesn't have these little claw-like hooks at the bottom. It's a much more refined and polished shape. It has to be, otherwise the ulna bone would snag on those. Instead, it's a nice circular form that it rotates around. Simple diagrams of the elbow flexed. We're seeing the tricep tendon through here. We're seeing the ulna bone along here. Ulna bone along here, tricep tendon through here, ulna bone through here, tricep tendon through here. This is what he's trying to explain, is that when the arm is flexed at the elbow, we get this really strong corner along here. Although it does have a slight angle to it, it's still a really strong corner through this section. And then we put the ridge muscles and the extensors on this side, and we put the flexors on this side. We get the ulna bone to appear again right up along through here, and we put the tricep, the brachialis, and the bicep on through here. We still want to make sure that this has a really strong shape to it back here, so the arm doesn't end up in our drawing turning into something rubber-like or spaghetti-like. We want to make sure that it has a really strong construction to it through that elbow space. And then this was the more stylized mechanical drawing that I was explaining. He kind of shows it to us in a very mechanical pin joint or hinge joint sort of way. We see this is the pivot point that the elbow rotates around. So the elbow's rotation is here. The ulna bone rotates around that point. He's pushed the size of this to show its mechanics, and he's also squeezed both of these bones together parallel once again. I don't think he had any concern with drawing that opening between. I think he was drawing everything to be very mechanical looking. We have the tricep being pulled around the corner here. And again, the same thing here. We have the tricep being pulled over along here, and it's attached to this part, not up along this part. That part is the part that the muscle or the tendon lays on top of when the arm is extended and when the arm is flexed. And then an exposed version of both of those bones prior to him placing the muscles over the top of it. I think this is a little bit further than we ever really need to go with the design. The way that I do this particular design and profile, we have this, and then if you want to do a draw through, as long as you can see your own drawing doing this, you know that you've attached it to this bone. And then when we draw it in this position, the same thing. Draw the bone around like this so that you can see kind of think of it like a wrench holding on to the bolt. And as long as you can draw all the way around it, then you'll understand how it's connected to this bone up here. When I read this chapter the first time, a long time ago, it was the first I had ever heard of friction hairs. I mean, I knew we had armpit hairs, but I never really thought about it. Hair is there so that we don't rub bare skin against bare skin. That's why our whole body has a layer of hair covering it slightly. So when we rub the skin against, like if our legs, when we rub them against each other, the hair is there to prevent any kind of chafing from occurring in the skin. And that's the same with the armpit. The hairs in the armpit help reduce the amount of burn we might take on when it's bare skin against bare skin. So this was the first that I had ever heard of them, called friction hairs, but look it up because that is actually the name of them. That was interesting to me. The problem with this chapter, or this section of the chapter, is that there's only 2 pages to it, and they don't get that involved. They don't connect the torso to the arm necessarily. There's, I think, a drawing on the next page, but here we can see the humerus in position with the glenoid cavity and the coracoid process, the acromion process, the clavicle, and the manubrium. So we can see that the arm is up like this. Then in the same position, we can see the tricep along in here, the brachialis here, the forearm flexors here, the extensors over here, ulna bone through here, tendon of the tricep, bicep connecting to these parts here. Coracobrachialis, I believe, is this particular section. And then he's showing along in here where the latissimus is intersecting those muscles, but there's very little explanation of that, if any explanation at all. I think this is the best drawing that he gives of all of those different connections. Bicep brachialis, coracobrachialis, latissimus, and the teres major, as they both crisscross over each other into the same groove between the coracobrachialis and the tricep that sits underneath here. The ulna bone, he's created a massive ulna bone here, the extensor group and the flexor group along here. I'm almost certain these are student drawings because there's a certain clunkiness to them that definitely doesn't read like Bridgman's drawings. Deltoid and the pectoralis, as those come up and over and go around the ulna bone. In here, the deltoid, the bicep, the tricep, the latissimus as it passes through that section, and the coracobrachialis seems to be missing from this drawing, as well as from this one here. Bicep again, with both of its tendons, and then the tricep sitting underneath here. I'm not really sure what this is supposed to be for. It might be one drawing in a series of drawings, because he's reduced these down to just mere tendon in the bicep group to show the arm flexing and to show both of its tendons attached to the 2 different points along the scapula. And maybe that's all it was supposed to show, but it's in the section that's called armpit. And with the armpit, we actually want to see all of the different muscles that are in here. The scapula, the coracoid process, the acromion process up along in here. And then we'll draw the arm forward in this direction so we can see it coming forward towards us. The bicep is going to attach here and here, come out this way. So we have the bicep muscle along here. Tricep is going to attach here as that goes into the tricep head along in here. We have the brachialis muscle up along in here. The deltoid, need a clavicle here. The deltoid is going to be anchored here. And from the acromion process, it's going to go around this way to the outside of the arm and attach to this side of the bone about halfway down the length of the bone, somewhere right around here. So it's going to go up and over like so. The pectoralis is going to do the same thing. It's going to go around and attach to the outside of the arm like so. Then the latissimus is going to come up from the bottom of the rib cage. And I've also forgotten here, coracobrachialis. So we'll put that in right along in here. So this is the coracobrachialis, the bicep, the deltoid, the tricep, the lat as it comes up and wedges between this muscle and this muscle, and the teres major as it crosses this way in front of the latissimus. So the lat goes up this way, the teres major goes this way, and both of those attach to the front of the arm. So this side up along here. So both of these come wedging up through here. These overlap all of the muscles. This comes through and is sort of like what you could call the armpit muscle. Then the bicep sitting on top and the tricep below. Now, I know even my drawing is getting a little bit messy here, but if you followed the drawing, then you understand what you're looking at here. And if I can really quickly do so, we will color each one of these so it's a little bit easier to read. Deltoid, pectoralis, teres major, latissimus, tricep, coracobrachialis, brachialis, and the bicep. And that's the crazy organization of the muscles within the armpit. Maybe a little bit more descriptive than some of these, but definitely messier. Now, if you watch any of my other videos on anatomy, I have this described in a few of them, but I will also be making another video coming soon with some of the more difficult parts of the body that change a little bit more often than others and make us feel a little bit confused about the organization of the muscles. That is something coming soon in one of my masterclass videos. So the leg is another one of those sections within this book that has a lot of weird labeling, or just a different kind of labeling. We call parts of the leg very differently now than what Bridgman was calling it. As an example, he would say that the leg is made up of the thigh, the leg, and the foot. He didn't call it the upper leg and the lower leg. He called it the thigh, the leg, and the foot. So you have to understand that in the translation of the book. In addition, he has some interesting design in both the leg and the foot that contradict the actual shapes. They work really well for his drawings, but they're not necessarily the way that the foot is designed and the way that the leg is designed. As an example, he has the rectus femoris curving this way towards the leg when it's actually a center down muscle. Whether these are design choices or this is what he thought about, there, like I said, are interesting design choices in this, but not necessarily the most helpful when you're trying to compare this to regular anatomy books, at least modern anatomy books. Now, in these first mini drawings, what he's doing is he's showing all the different sections. We have the hip section up along in here, made up of the gluteus medius and the gluteus maximus. We have the vastus muscles from the back view that we're mostly seeing on this is the lateral side of the leg, and we're seeing the vastus lateralis over here. The hamstring group in here, he is really designing the tendons to be even more visible in scale than we actually see them. They're thinner, they're more like this one down here. And this one, he's showing again how the hamstring goes around the calf muscle group as that inserts into the upper back of the femur bone. And then there's a small portion over here that belongs to the vastus lateralis again. Now I want to show this page and this page together because this here is the guide for this page here. All of these muscles are assembled together, and unless you understand what you're looking at, it's this page here that shows where each of those muscles' origin and insertion goes. So I'll look at this page first, and with this one along in here, this is the sartorius. And it attaches to the front of the tibia, and it comes from the anterior superior iliac spine. Number 3 is the rectus femoris, and this comes straight down through here. This muscle overlaps it. So sometimes this muscle might look like it's curving this way, but it's actually not. It's the sartorius that's covering it, that's causing it to look like it deviates. This is the vastus lateralis. This is the vastus medialis. That's what number 5 and number 4 represent. And again, when we're looking at this, he's showing us the insertion and the origin. All of this is the origin for the rectus femoris, and this is the insertion where the tendon connects to the patella. The patella is another name for the kneecap. Number 1 is the iliotibial tract, which starts up here and then crosses over the vastus lateralis and attaches to the front of the leg, down in here. Then on the lower leg, we have the extensor muscles, which start up along in here and then spread out along the toes. That would be number 8. Number 6 is the tibialis anterior, which starts over here and then connects inside the arch of the foot. And then number 7 is the peroneus longus and brevis, which start up along in here in this tract and come down and attach to the back of this bone on the foot base. And those are the dominant muscles that you'll see from the front view. Now, if somebody's really well developed, then you'll also see a hint of the gastrocnemius up along in here, and maybe even a hint of the soleus just behind the peroneus longus. But for the most part, you see the peroneus longus, the extensor muscles, and the tibialis anterior. These are coming from the lateral side of the leg. And if we look back at the previous page, peroneus longus, which dips behind the ankle, comes forward and attaches to the bone here. The extensor muscle group, which goes out to the toes from the big toe to toe number 4. The tibialis anterior, which crosses over the foot and into the arch of the foot. He doesn't mention these. Those are on the back of the leg. These are all the muscles that sit on the front of the leg. And again, if we're looking at this page shows us the connections of all those muscles. Now, this leg is a little bit interesting. He has the leg coming down this way to the kneecap, but then he has the foot turned inward down below. So you have to be careful when looking at that, because the lower leg is pronated inward slightly from straight forward, which this leg is more straightforward in its design. And he's showing us again the difference in the different muscles back over here: tibialis anterior, the extensors, the peroneus longus, and I believe that is the gastrocnemius, because it is coming from a bit higher up. Then we have the rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, and vastus medialis. And then this is the tendon from the bicep femoris from the back of the leg as it connects to the top of the fibula. Then we're looking at the leg from the lateral view. These are the bones as we see them from the outside of the leg. So the hip bone, the kneecap, the femur, the tibia, the fibula. And in the drawings over here, both of these are also lateral views. And he's showing us the quadricep muscles, the tensor fascia lata as it flexes when we sit down, gluteus medius, gluteus maximus, bicep femoris as it rotates and the tendon rotates to the head of the fibula. And then the gastrocnemius and soleus on the back of the leg. Those same tendons again right here. And then we're looking at vastus lateralis as it connects to the patella. The rectus femoris would be coming from here, coming down and attaching, which I don't understand why that isn't shown here. This is the gluteus medius. This is all part of the gluteus maximus. This is the bicep femoris. Then we have the gastrocnemius through here. I believe this is the peroneus longus along here, and it attaches to this bone right here. He doesn't have the soleus in here, which would be in between both of these muscles. And then number 7 is the tibialis anterior as it connects along here and then goes into the arch of the foot on the front. And that one is a little bit tricky too, because the dotted line over here represents the other side of the foot, and it might be difficult to understand what we're looking at when we are looking at the particular diagram. But this leg here and this diagram here go hand in hand with each other. This is the medial side of the leg, and the medial side of the leg in the inner thigh. We see, and in this case, he has his own interpretation of a muscle. He has the gracilis right here, which he's made really large. And if you look at any modern books, the gracilis is the same as the sartorius. It's this belt strap of a muscle, not this big, heavy duty muscle. And then he has the semitendinosus here and a hint of the semimembranosus here. Both of those are half of the hamstring muscle group. The other half of that is the bicep femoris, the vastus medialis, the rectus femoris, then the gastrocnemius and the soleus. But he doesn't have the flexor digitorum, which is the third muscle on the medial side. It goes gastrocnemius, which comes from up above here, and we can see that here. It's coming from up here and attaching right here. And then the soleus is coming from
this part of the bone, but also from the fibula, and fills in this space along in here. And then the flexor digitorum comes from back along here and then works its way to the front of the foot into the toes, which again, he doesn't have visible within this diagram. Well, we can see the rectus femoris here, and then the vastus internus, which we don't see at all, sits under the rectus femoris. And then we see the vastus internus, which he's saying is coming from along here, comes down to here, and then turns into tendon and attaches to the patella. But again, the diagrams that we see within these dotted lines represent the insertion and the origin of the muscles. And to be honest, there's the Elliott Goldfinger book, which I think does a much better job of showing all of these connection points. In fact, the Goldfinger book would be the one that I would get in substitution of the Bridgman book for showing the more modern connection, where the muscles begin, their origin, and their insertion, and how those muscles connect from various angles. He shows the same muscle from all the different vantage points that you would see the muscle from, and shows those connection points from those different angles. He's also doing this really interesting thing with the quadricep muscles, with this sort of flanged edge here. I think he's showing it more as far as a mass goes than of a design in these particular drawings. And it seems as though he's favoring this half of the leg visually more than this half of the leg. Tensor fascia lata, gluteus medius, gluteus maximus, bicep femoris, the tendon of the bicep femoris, quadricep all through here, connecting to the patella, gastrocnemius, soleus, peroneus longus and brevis, extensor muscles, tibialis anterior. Tibialis anterior is this one right here, tibialis anticus. The name has changed, of course. And then he says vastus externus and vastus internus. But we call that the vastus lateralis and the vastus medialis now. Gastrocnemius is still gastrocnemius, gluteus medius and maximus are still the same names. And then in this particular instance, he's mostly describing what he calls the column of the leg, the shapes of the muscles, and how they feel very column-like in their design. And he starts some of these rhythms very clearly, but then they get a little convoluted, like the sartorius muscle over here. And I believe this one is the rectus femoris. It might be. The rectus femoris sits under the sartorius, which would be this line right here. And this is the tensor fascia lata. This is the gluteus medius, and this is part of the gluteus maximus. This is the quadricep muscle. I'm not sure why he cuts this part away to show us the interior as well as the exterior of it. This is the bicep femoris attaching to the fibula. And then he has the bulk of this muscle with it cut away to show the bones sitting underneath. He also shows this like a tendon going up this way, but it actually terminates right up along through here. It sits on the femur bone is like this on the back of the femur, and the gastrocnemius comes up and connects here and over here. And he usually draws those tendons like this connecting into the two muscle heads. And he doesn't separate the two muscle heads. He keeps them as a large bulk, showing their angle. The medial line is lower, the lateral line is higher in the arc, but he doesn't separate those muscles from one another. And I don't know if they knew that yet back then or not, but all of these diagrams show those bulked together. And he might just be showing it for the sake of design more than for the anatomical purposes. Because remember, again, this is the figure drawing book, and he's not really focused as heavily on all of the anatomy within this book as he is with the design of the shapes that we're looking at for each part of the body. And I think that's where sometimes we misinterpret what he's doing, because we do mistake it for an anatomy book at times, but it really is a design book. It's showing us how to see the human form through design in the different shapes that the body is made up of. Here we have the posterior view of the leg. Gluteus maximus, gluteus medius, tensor fascia, vastus lateralis, which goes to the front of the leg, semitendinosus, semimembranosus, which both of those muscles are sort of shaped like this with the tendons over off to the side. And then the bicep femoris is over here with its tendon over off to the side. And both of those make up the hamstring group, this large ball-like shape on the back of our leg. And then both of these tendons are anchored to the tibia and the fibula and support the leg on either side of the calf muscle group. Here he does split those muscles ever so slightly, but he's not really designing it to show us the split between the muscle heads, as he is just showing us how the bulk of it works and how it's anchored to this part of the femur bone. So again, all the numbers up here are the numbers over here. Origin, insertion. For the bicep femoris, origin and insertion, which there's also an insertion over here on the femur bone. It has two tendons anchored to both the femur and to the fibula. Number 3, semitendinosis, from the ischium to the base of the tibia, from the ischium to the tibia. And the same with the semimembranosus, from the ischium to the tibia. Number 6, the gastrocnemius, from these 2 points here to the heel, and the soleus, from along here and along here to the heel as well. So its muscle comes down like this. We see a hint of it over here on the medial side. Gastrocnemius is up here. We see that as the upper third. This is the middle third. And the flexor muscles as the lower third, which again, he doesn't show in any of these diagrams. And then from that posterior view, we have several different instances of how the tendons of the semimembranosus and tendinosus and the bicep femoris surround the gastrocnemius muscle and create this sort of caliper looking shape between the two of them that are connected to the lower leg here and along here on the tibia and the fibula. And then he's also showing with these angles the way that each of these muscles terminates into the body. This one terminates at an angle this way. These muscle heads are longer on the medial side, shorter on the lateral side. And then the ankles, higher on the medial side, lower on the lateral side. The rectus femoris connected to the patella, the gastrocnemius as it drops down. And if this is a fibula right here, then this would be the bicep femoris attached to that fibula. This negative space along in here is called the popliteal space. That's what this space is here. This space is here. And then I don't know why. Maybe he's showing that this tendon and this crossing over each other is what creates that space from the lateral view, but we don't see that space at all because this is all completely covered with muscle and tendon. But I think it's probably a cross section to reinforce that this has depth to it, where both of these might be difficult to see that depth visually. Now, starting on these pages, he is sort of showing us the anatomy, but he doesn't get into the adductor group on this page. This is strictly the quadricep, and the fourth muscle of the quadricep sits underneath the rectus femoris, but he doesn't show us that muscle here. The vastus medialis, which he's calling the vastus internus, the vastus lateralis, which he's calling the vastus externus, and the rectus femoris along in here. And then he mentions the adductor muscles in this particular image, but he doesn't break it down into the adductor minor, adductor major, and the adductor magnus, which are the 3 muscles that we're seeing in here. And then there's 2 more that come from the hip and from the spine, the ilia and the psoas muscles that come from both of those points, which also fill this space. He's not mentioning by name any of those muscles here. And then up here, he's showing us all of the bones that we see from the front, the pubis, the femur, and then the head of the femur, the neck of the femur, and the great trochanter, which in our construction drawing, we basically just draw 2 ovals, or a circle and an oval, with the neck connecting them together. And there's also the lesser trochanter, which the iliopsoas is connected to. And like the previous chapters, he has 1, 2, 3, and 4 different stages of looking at these muscles. He's calling this the tricep of the thigh, but it's actually the quadricep. There's 4 muscles. There's 2 that sit directly above and below each other right here where the rectus femoris is. And he's also showing this curving this way, which it does not. It's a straight up and down muscle along in here. And the sartorius crosses over it through this space, which you can see here, the sartorius right along here. With this diagram, he's showing us the angles of the muscles. These all angle inward this way. The bulk of this muscle terminates roughly where this muscle terminates in its curvature. These are the two furthest points out on both sides of the leg, but are in opposition of each other at an angle like so. And then the kneecap sits horizontally through this particular space, although the kneecap shape is something a little bit more like this, with these little notches cut out on both sides. And we can see this on many different kneecaps, these 3 different little bumps on the kneecap. In fact, in another anatomy book, I'm forgetting which one it is right offhand, but it explains the old man and the beard, which is the kneecap, the meniscus, and the tendon of the kneecap, which attaches to the tibial tuberosity. That's the bump that sticks out on the tibia that the patellar tendon is anchored to. Now with this page, what's interesting is he's showing us the medial side of the leg. But in this one, this is an adductor muscle. And in the descriptions, I believe these go with this. And this, I don't know what it is related to, because this is the vastus internus or the vastus medialis. This is the rectus femoris. He calls it just rectus. The adductor group sits in here, which this is the adductor magnus. And this is exactly how it anchors. It also anchors down here. This is the sartorius muscle through here. And then he has the hamstring group. He's pointing to tendons, which means that we possibly do not see the hamstring group from his drawing, but we actually do from this view right here. We would see a hint of the hamstring group sitting down below the adductor group. So this again is a little confusing to even myself, like why he's diagramming it the way he is. And then this one, I'm not really clear what he's trying to show. And we don't have an outer view on this page. This is all inner view between all 3 of these, which is the medial view. He calls it inner and outer, but it's medial and lateral. That's the more modern terminology for the 2 sides we're looking at. These are all lateral view, but he doesn't have them labeled. Gluteus medius, the femur bone, rectus femoris, the hamstring group, rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, rectus femoris, gluteus medius, gluteus maximus, and the hamstring group, which in this case we see the bicep femoris. Those are all the different muscles that we're seeing from these particular angles. What I think he's doing is he's creating a different elevation for the muscle and showing us how this muscle anchored twice to the pelvis is then seen with both of them at a skewed view here. And then when the leg is in total profile, we only see one of those muscles. And then he shows us this muscle from different views, which we are going to see possibly, except that the vastus lateralis over here covers the majority of it, and we would probably only see the tendon from this particular view. And then I find that this section of the legs is a bit on the redundant side. Once we get to the 3rd diagram, from the 3rd diagram to the 5th diagram, we see a lot of redundancy. With the patella, it's really difficult because these are drawings, so it's hard to know that this is what we see from the front view. Here are those 3 notches. This is the back view, and what's going on with this design is that the femur has those 2 bumps on both sides in the back. In the front, there's a groove through here, and this is the back of the patella, and that groove sits inside of here, and the rest of the patella sits on the outside here. So this slides within this groove. When we flex our leg, the patella slides this way and goes to this side, but stays within the groove on the back side. So your kneecap can't just sort of slide anywhere. It's sliding on a track, and that's not really visible from any of these diagrams. Patella is anchored to the tibia at the tibial tuberosity, which on the tibia bone sticks out like this to the front, and that tendon anchors to it like so. I think here we have the patella and then the tendon of the patella here, but it's really difficult to say if that's actually what we're seeing or if we're just seeing the tibia and the femur as the leg is flexing. Here we can kind of see that groove. He's drawn it in along in here, but because it's not shaded in, we wouldn't know that it has an indentation. And that's what this is up along in here as well. It's that groove flattening out to the front of the femur bone along here. Here it is in profile view. The little part on the back, that this right here is this right here. This is this view right here. Again, it's very confusing when we first look at these, and unless you have another anatomy book to cross-reference, some of these diagrams may not make any sense visually at all. And this is where we begin some of the redundancy. We see the patella anchored to the tibial tuberosity, and then we can see the band of the rectus femoris. That would be this going into this muscle up here. And both of these anchor the patella into place. This is how we see it fleshed over. Here's those two divots with the third one, and then here's the beard of the old man down below. These other diagrams don't show any of those bumps. It's just mostly showing the mechanics here and all of the tendons of the different muscles as they're anchoring to the tibia. We have the bicep femoris over here. I'm not really sure what this tendon represents. If that might be, you know what that is? That's the iliotibial tract as it sits over the vastus lateralis. Rectus femoris, the femur bone here and here, tibia down here, tibial tuberosity, fibula over here. Femur, tibia, fibula bump over here, and then the gastrocnemius on both sides. This right along in here would be the tibialis anterior, which I think in his terminology is tibialis anticus, but that has changed since his time. This is upside down. This is the femur bone. This is the rectus femoris, the patellar band, tibial tuberosity, fibula, tibia, bursa sac, or the meniscus. And in here he's calling this a pad or a sac, but the meniscus is this along in here. Then from the back view, this is also upside down. This is the two wheels on the back of the femur bone, fibula and tibia, with the back of it and its extension. But it's really, because both of those are upside down, it's very difficult. If you don't know what you're looking at, you won't understand that those are upside down. You'll just copy those and not really understand what you're looking at there. And then again, the rectus femoris, which he's calling the common tendon, the patella, the patellar ligament, fibula, tibia, femur, tibia, fibula. And he's showing these little bands or these little ligaments that hold our leg in place. The ACL, the PCL, the MCL, and the LCL. But these are actually cross tendons like this. They're not just singular tendons. They actually cross over one another on all four sides. Here's that same drawing again. Here are the bones just shaded to show their form. And then here's the leg fleshed over. The kneecap sits directly between the tibia and the femur. Fibula is over here with the bicep femoris attached to it here. This is the quadricep muscle going up and over, and he's grouped it all together. The vastus lateralis, the rectus femoris, and a hint of the vastus medialis over here on this side. And then this mass down in here is the hamstring group. This is the gluteus group. Very foreshortened in this particular drawing. And like I said before, this is becoming a redundancy because we're just looking at the same things over and over again. Here's the leg on the inside view, or the medial side. So the quadricep will belong in here, the sartorius coming down through here, and the adductor group along with the hamstring group. But this really visually doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's this group again right here. This is the sartorius as it comes down through, which on this page is the most important takeaway, is looking at where the sartorius is, where it anchors, where it comes from, and how it sits just to the inside of the vastus medialis along in here. In here we have the vastus medialis. I believe this is the rectus femoris, but it's a little bit strange to me because it's actually coming from up here and not from along over here. And then the adductor group underneath, the sartorius along here, the adductor group, along with the hamstring group, sort of all grouped together as one mass. And then a shaded version of the bones from the medial side. And then our last page of the knee is more of a rendered view of it. Here's a rendered design view. Here's a soft render of it. So it isn't as developed as this one is, with all the subplanes of the vastus medialis, the vastus lateralis, the rectus femoris, fibula, the gastrocnemius group along in here, patellar tendon, meniscus, patella, tibial tuberosity, tibia, femur, vastus medialis, bicep femoris, iliotibial band, rectus femoris, patella, patellar tendon, tibial tuberosity, sartorius, gracilis, patella. And then on the back of the leg, he's showing that termination point for the gastrocnemius muscle and the semitendinosus membranosus over here, the bicep femoris over here, and the hamstring group right along through here. So as I said before, in the arms and the legs, the words and the pictures don't get along with each other very well. There's some descriptions with numbers that don't have a drawing that goes with them. And in some instances, there's a bunch of drawings, but no words that go along with those. And unless you understand what it is that you're looking at visually, you can get lost in this section pretty easily. However, pay attention to the design drawings. These are the drawings that we should be looking at, noticing the surface planes by his shading and how he's dividing the surfaces one from the other, so that we're looking at undersides, top sides, left sides, right sides, medial side, front side, and so forth, and how he's breaking up the space through design. That's what we want to take away. Then when we look at a leg in a photograph or on a model, we have more that we can work with. And what you would want to pay attention to, especially if you're working from a live model, is when they distribute their weight, when they shift a little bit to change the balance. When somebody's holding a pose for a long time, they have to shift their weight. And when they do, these little areas sharpen. When the muscles are shifting, they're flexing a little bit. And you'll see a little bit of that design every now and again before the leg relaxes. And that's the stuff that you want to capture, not the relaxed leg, but those little bits and pieces that show strength and all the articulation of the muscles and the bones within these spaces. Now, in these last few sections that we're looking at, I might sound or come across as negative, but the problem with these parts of the book is that the descriptions and the drawings don't align with each other very well. Or when you do read the descriptions, it takes like 3 or 4 times to really understand what it is that you're reading, because it's very wordy. And so the foot is no different. The foot is very wordy within all of its sections. The things to pay attention to in these cases are the different placement of the bones to, say, the body fat, like in this foot down here. We can see that the bones sit across the top of the foot while everything on the underside is padded. And that's the takeaway from this drawing. Otherwise, you have to sort of know what you're looking at. This is the tendon of the tibialis anterior. And this is the band that holds the different muscle tendons down against the foot. This along in here, I believe, is the flexor group, because this is the arch of the foot right here, but he doesn't have any description of the flexor group anywhere in the book. This would be the only time that we would even see a hint of that at all. With this drawing, what's important to look at is the way that he's developed the feet, or the way that he's developed the toes, and the different angles of the toes that we're looking at are bone related on the top surface. These are all bones that we're looking at here. And so we're seeing these like little notches on the tops of the toes. This is a tendon along through here. And this foot is elevated. They're pushing down on the toes. And the other thing that I believe he's talking about is this straight line along through here, how the tibia and the medial side of the foot line up with one another and create a vertical column, especially when we raise the heel up off the floor and we put our weight down on the toes. On this page, he's showing the different kinds of movement. Here we have the fibula and the tibia turning outward, or the foot doing something like this, big toe over here, all the other toes over here, and we're able to rotate our foot this way, which is called eversion. And then when we have our foot going this way, it's called inversion. But he doesn't have an inversion drawing in here. He has the eversion drawing. And then again, he has the heel raised and the toes to the ground. When he talks about the toes, he'll say that these toes here have 3 segments to them. 1, 2, 3. while the big toe only has 2. And he also says that the pinky toe only has 2 because the pinky toe doesn't do this. It kind of curls inward. So we see this and we see this mostly. And the pinky toe doesn't have a lot of action within the movement of the foot. It's sort of this little straggler that sits and curls like this over off to the side, while these are taking the weight. And then he has a lateral view of the foot with a lateral view of the bones, the heel, the pinky toe, and the arch, which isn't as extreme on the lateral side as it is on the medial side. And what I think is kind of important in these is the stepping of the shapes, the stair stepping of the shapes. Pay attention to that, because when you do look at a foot, it's usually brightly lit and those surfaces aren't very well defined. But understanding that we have the bones coming down through here, we have the extensor muscles sitting over here, and then the fat pads along here, it creates these stair step effects along the foot to pay attention to separate this mass from the rest of the foot below. On this page, we have the tibialis anterior here, which is this muscle through here. And here he has inversion. That's what this muscle is doing. And then he has eversion over here, which is caused by the peroneus longus and brevis on the outside of our leg, the lateral side of our leg. Here he's showing the heel and it connected to the gastrocnemius and soleus. The band along in here that sits over the tendons as those go out to the toes. Here's the band, and then he's showing heel side lifting and toe side lifting. And it pivots from this point right here. That's the pivot point for all that movement. It gets really messy through here, but this is the tendon to the patella, and this is the tibia that's sitting behind it. This is the femur sitting behind this. This is the rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis. A little bit messy in this particular drawing, likely a student interpretation of one of Bridgman's drawings. This diagram shows up twice in the book, and what he's showing is that when we're up on the arch, the center of the mass of the foot lines up along in here. When we drop down to our toes, we have this angle and the mass moves forward slightly. This page has to do with movement of the ankle and the mechanics of that movement. This is the fibula bone, and this is the mass within the foot, in the arch space of the foot, just below those bones, and how it rolls forward and rolls back when we point our toes versus standing on our foot flat. The writing here accompanies this page here. The annular ligament holding down the tendons of all of the muscles, the heel mass, the toe mass, and when our foot arches in certain angles, the heel will rotate a little bit inward like this, where when we're standing, both of these are flat to one another. But this is where it divides between this mass and this mass back here, which would be this bone here versus all the other bones here. And then he's showing that from various angles. And then in this page of drawings, these are all from the lateral view, the outside of the foot, and showing the wrench-like connection of the ankle bones to the foot and how they lock in place, especially on this side with the fibula, the tibia up along over here, the top of the foot bones, the extensor muscle group, the fat pads down below. One of the only views that he draws of the bottom of the foot, which isn't all that articulate. We have a separate section here. This is heavy over here. This is heavy behind the toes along through here. But he's not drawing that within his diagram. Extensor muscle group, bones, fatty tissue in these particular places. The elevation of the pinky toe, separation of the heel from the rest of the toe group, the fibula, the tibia, and their relationship to each other, how the tibia sits more forward than the fibula. And then that same drawing with the leg drawn back and with the leg drawn forward, showing the interlocking of the fibula in relationship to the rest of the foot. And then a medial side here, this is the arch side of the foot, and his, again, showing the interlocking of these shapes, but not the strongest of the bottom view. It's not the best diagram showing how the bottom view is broken up into its 3 different parts. And then the last few pages of the foot, we have some diagrams of the bones and the tendons from the different muscles, but this should actually have the lower leg drawn in with this. You have to sort of follow these tendons and follow them back up to the muscles to know what you're looking at here. But he does give us some descriptions of the bones in the foot, like the astragalus, which is sitting underneath here. That's sort of the bone that curves like this, that the tibia rocks over the top of, and the fibula holds in place off to the side. Then the oscalcus on the back, that's the heel bone, the tibia and the fibula. And then it's really hard to see, but this is a tendon back here. That's the Achilles tendon through there. This is the annular ligament across here. This is the extensor muscle that goes out to all the toes. This is the tendon for the peroneus longus as it anchors to this bone right here. Then down here again, he's breaking it into the metatarsals, the phalanges, the astragalus, which is again the arc, and the tibia. So this is the medial side. And these bones sit over the arch, not over the heel. This muscle is the only time he shows it. This is the abductor for the big toe. And then we have the annular ligament, the flexor pollicis. So this is the second time he shows it, but he doesn't show the muscle at all. He just mentions it and shows the tendons as they're passing under the arch towards the toes. And then the tibialis anterior as it comes across and anchors to the underside of the arch of the foot, right along through here. But again, if you don't have another book to cross-reference with this one, you wouldn't know any of those little shapes at all. You would know their names, but you wouldn't necessarily understand what's going on there. This is interesting, the way he draws this. The bones are actually curved in this particular direction, like so. You can kind of see how these bones curve this way, where he has them curved in this direction. So I don't quite understand what he's doing with that design, especially since the extensors sit over here and make the foot a little bit fuller across the top of it. This is completely cut away, but that's where the extensor muscles would sit and create a much rounder and more curved in this direction sort of rhythm line than in this particular direction. And all of the toes here, he's showing us the tops of the bones and then the fat pads that sit directly underneath. Tops of the bones, fat pads underneath, tops of the bones, fat pad. And here are the bones that we're looking at through these sections, which is pretty much the same design for every toe, as you can see in this diagram over here. The fat pad of the big toe does something like this, as do all of them. And these are the underside, the bottom of the foot, and then showing how the big toe has its toenail facing upward from directly in front, while all of these have toenails facing towards us. And if we wear shoes a lot, we're not going to see toes like this at all. We're going to see this part with the toenail facing a little bit more forward, like so. Our feet are groomed by the shoes we wear, and our toes start to curl slightly because of wearing shoes. Where if we were barefoot all our lives, we would have our toes a little bit more like this in their design. Here we have the same diagram as before, but with some slightly different information about the mechanics of the foot. And we can ignore this diagram altogether. And then finally on this last page, he's showing us the foot with the toes pointed downward in each of these different instances. Here he's showing that there's a gap that forms between the big toe and the first toe of our four over here. And the difference in the way that this is the pinky toe curled downward, and this is the rest of the toes before we get to the big toe, which is flat. Here's a quick diagram of the toes and how to draw them. The tendons as they go up the tibia, the extensor muscle group over here, fibula, the Achilles tendon group back in here, and the heel with the fat pad. Here's that reverse curve again that I don't necessarily agree with in the diagrams, because those bones are actually doing this in the opposite direction. But it is interesting, especially if you are to have somebody with their foot elevated on the toes like a dancer. It might be a good idea to push the rhythm this way so that it creates a strong counter rhythm to the shin bone, which is probably what's going on there with his design, because otherwise we would have this turn this way and we would have these turn this way as well, and those are rhythms that are working against each other. where this flows into each other beautifully from the gastrocnemius and the medial line of the tibia bone, and then the ankles here and over here to show some structure through that S-curve. So I believe that is what he's showing us here, is a rhythm for drawing these opposing angles and getting everything to flow together nicely. And then this last picture doesn't really have any description to it, but he's showing the separation of the heel from the lower leg group and how to draw them so that the foot stays separated from the rest of the leg. The heel doesn't disappear just because we're pointing our toes. It creates this little crease across the skin back here. And we want to draw this nice elegant shape of the Achilles tendon and the heel as they stick out from that portion of the leg. And this is rather low for the fibula, but it could very well be the fibula in the pointing of the foot like so. And this is dropped down lower, this is up higher, and here's that wedge again that he's showing us from all these different angles. But now we're seeing it from the lateral view. Okay, now on to a few demonstrations using the information that we see here from some photographs.
Well, if you're finding this information helpful for your studies or helping you level up in the work that you're doing, the style that you're approaching, or whatever it may be, please consider liking the video, subscribe to this channel, and share these videos with other artists or other people that you know who are trying to learn art or level up in the work that they do themselves. If you'd like to go one step further, consider subscribing to my Patreon page or becoming a member here on this channel. In both of those spaces, you will find exercises and lessons that help you achieve and accomplish the information that I'm giving you within these videos through repetition and through very specific levels of accomplishment to achieve this information. All right, thank you very much again. Let's get back into the information.
We have a really good reference here. A guy who has muscles and muscle structure, but they aren't sharpened. And what we're going to try to do is look for the plane separations and the plane breaks within these forms. And we'll start with the deltoid. We have that coming up off of the clavicle. We need this point right here on the clavicle to be able to break the shape away. So the deltoid goes up and over and to the side of the arm. It anchors to the humerus bone. And then it's turned upward this way. So we have now a surface and a surface to work with. One that is more forward facing and another one that is upward facing right along here. Then we have the bicep that travels through this section. And this second lump right here that we see is the brachialis muscle. The bicep is all through this space and comes down along this way. We can see its break right along in here. Pull a line through there. Erase the deltoid line so it's pulled back just a little bit further. I'm in a foreshortened length and I'm drawing these at full length, which is the wrong thing to do. So now we have the bicep in here, the tendon of the bicep as it comes forward into the forearm, then the brachialis that it sits on top of right along in here. We'll look for the plane break where the shadow changes direction. Cast a small shadow onto the body underneath. The elbow out here, we want to strengthen this, give it a sharpness. That's this space right in here. We can also see a little bit of the underside of it right along through here. And then I'm going to take this up through the wrist. The ulna bone ends here. I'm going to draw this with a little bit more heaviness to it in the same way that Bridgman would. And that's so it doesn't become an inferior form within the space. And then we have the forearm flexors through here, and we can see the extensors out here. Find the apex of the form here, find the apex of the forearm down here, just above the brachialis. Then take this through the wrist, and then along here, I want to make sure that there's a solid plane break. Then we have the hand shape that's extended beyond the wrist, so we can see this overlapping the wrist through here, another plane break. We can also see the tendons in the wrist bulging downward like so. So the wrist is like this and the tendons are doing something like this through here. So another plane break right along in here. Again, I'm going to remove some of the previous lines to give these more visibility. Then we can down here see the apex of the tricep muscle. So I want to make a deliberate corner along there. And now we're going to find the humerus, the epicondyles of the humerus right here. We can see that very clearly here in the drawing, in the photo. And I'm making sure that there's a solid triangular connection between those 3 points. And the tendon of the tricep as it intersects the end of the ulna bone here. I can probably drop this down just a little bit lower. And that would be all through here, tricep plane structure. Brachialis here. Bicep, we can see a plane break along here. So draw this a little bit stronger. And then I'm going to lift the deltoid even higher. And that intersects the pectoralis muscle through here as the pectoralis goes into the armpit along in here. And on the chest, we can see this division very clearly, and then this division pretty clearly. The rest of this is volume through the pectoralis muscle, and then it stretches along the chest through here. And then finally we have the coracobrachialis right along in here. Make that a little stronger looking. Make this a little bit stronger looking. And then within this muscle structure, we just need to make sure that we can see the roundness of the muscles and the surface direction. Get to the hand shape. And we've now taken his muscles and we've developed them even further. Over on the other side, we'll do the same thing. Deltoid comes up around through here, comes down and intersects the trapezius muscle. It swings up and out to the side. And through here, we have the bicep. Over here, we have the brachialis, epicondyle, and then the elbow. Pretty visible right along through here. Here, here, and here is the elbow shape. Then we have the tricep that comes down along through here. And this is the coracobrachialis. Make a clear distinction of that muscle. Terminate the bicep before we get to the forearm. Find the side plane. Small side plane for the coracobrachialis. And then everything along here turns to the underside. Brachioradialis over here. And we want to make sure again that we can see the break in the muscles very clearly, because that's what Bridgman is doing. He's generating a design structure that allows the eye to see the forms very clearly. This muscle breaks along here and then heads towards the thumb. And then the rest of this structure along here, extensor muscles, as it goes into the wrist, across here, tendon for the flexors, pronator teres, and then the flexor group. Side plane, top plane, along through here. And then we're going to make the bicep just a little bit larger, and then make the deltoid just a little bit larger. where the deltoid intersects the pectoralis muscle along here, the extension of the pectoralis muscle through here, sternum, clavicle, heading up, stretch through here, and then we can again see this striation and this striation very clearly in these lighter areas on the chest. Plane structure, looking for the volumes, giving them more dynamic change in direction rather than a nice soft curve, or hardening those shapes to really be able to emphasize and see them clearly when we're designing. And this is what Bridgman would do for his students to be able to learn and see the geometry that they're working with, as opposed to creating these soft forms, these soft ambiguous forms. All right, let's move on to the legs. Now we want to do the same thing for the legs. I'm actually going to start with the kneecap and draw in the tendon, which is down through here. The kneecap is here, tendon is through here. And the bursa sac sits behind that tendon. Tilt this slightly this way, build the tendon, and then build in the structure of the side planes through here and through here. Bursa sac underneath. And then here is the tibial tuberosity. Kind of emphasize that, or overemphasize that a little bit. And through this space, and here we can see the tibia bone. So that's right along here and right along here. Across in this section is the tibia. We also see a hint of the side plane of it. Draw this down into the foot. Then up around in here we have the tendon from the vastus medialis, which is going to be this shape here. Right along in here is the vastus medialis. And then just above that, along here, is the sartorius. That goes up through here, comes down and attaches down here. Then we have a hint of the femur hiding just behind here. Rectus femoris through here and all along in here. Tendon terminates about right here. There's the head of the muscle. With this, we see a side plane of the muscle through here. And then this is all the top. Tendon for the vastus lateralis. The muscle head begins right here and then travels around the side up along through here. And we have the adductor group in here. Small side plane, attachment point in the pelvis. This is going to come up and attach to the iliac crest. Tensor fascia lata muscle here as it runs into the vastus lateralis. Side plane through here, and then this muscle, which is right in here under the shorts. We're seeing this end of the head, then a bit of the gluteus medius right along in here. This part could come over a little farther through here, then down into the calf muscle group. We have the gastrocnemius, soleus, and then in this case the flexor muscles are actually covered by the tendon of the tibial tuberosity, which is right through here. The extensor muscles as they come down along here, and those go out to the toes through here, and then the peroneus longus over here as that goes behind the ankle bone here. It's starting to get a little bit on the heavy side. I want to trim these down just a little bit. And we also have the ankle visible over on this side. And I have them sort of in the wrong position. This ankle should come down a little lower. This should come up a little higher. And this I need to thin down a little bit more. But I still want to make sure that there's a sharp corner over here. In addition, we're seeing a part of the gastrocnemius coming from up behind the knee and passing behind the peroneus longus. And through here we have where the muscle head attaches to the tendon. Over on this side we have the underplane over here. And then dropping down into the foot, we have the big toe over on this side, making it a block, and then dividing that from all the other toes passing through here. We see a hint of the bottom of the foot just below them. Pinky toe off to the side plane of the foot. Letting this pass into the arch here. And then the division for the other toes. The extensor muscles of the foot would be a little shape right along in here, which would also reach out to each of the toes. Now that foot does look very, very large. I'm going to shrink it down just a little bit to keep it in proportion to the rest of the body. And the camera is close to this as well, so there is a bit of a camera distortion taking place. And I know where I broke this. The big toe and the rest of the toes should come together a little closer to each other. And that'll thin down the foot a little bit more. All right, now to the other leg. Same kind of thing. We're looking at the kneecap over here. Side plane of the kneecap to the tibial tuberosity. Bursa sac that sits underneath it. Tendon from the rectus femoris. Vastus medialis. Rectus femoris. Vastus lateralis over here as that passes behind the rectus femoris. Sartorius as that's going to come down and attach to the tibia, which we can see here, different and separated from the femur up here. Then we have the entire adductor group through here and all through this space. The point on the iliac crest, and I'm drawing it in a circle similar to what he did. It's not an actual circle. It's the end of the pelvis, the end of the iliac crest along here and along here as it goes up to the tailbone. And then over on this side, tensor fascia lata. We have the bottom plane of the vastus medialis. And then we have the adductor group along in here. We can see its plane structure like so. Side plane versus the front plane. And then in the back we have the hamstring group. Tibia rhythm through here. Then gastrocnemius, soleus, and we can see a part of the flexor group in here. Tibialis anterior. Tendon as it comes over into the arch. Ankle bone on the other side. Extensor group as this comes down and joins the toes. We can see a hint of the extensor muscle over here, but it is mostly tibialis anterior on this profile. Big toe, the stair step shapes for all the other toes along here, and then the pinky toe. Back into the foot, big toe break through here. He looks a little bit on the flat-footed side, arch through here, heel, and then up into the foot. And then the extensor muscles along in here, going to the first four toes. And this falls into the arch through here. The underplane along in here. This can actually come out just a little bit farther. Bottom of this muscle, bottom of this muscle. And the skin is going to blend all of these things together through here. Plane breaks along in here, plane break along here. And we have leg muscles with design definition to them in the same way that Bridgman would have designed the leg muscles, making sure that we can see the apex of every muscle form, where the head of the muscle is at its widest, and using an actual facet change instead of it being a nice soft curved line the way we see it in the photograph. And that's the way you would study Bridgman for the extremities, looking at it more geometrically than softened in its curvature. In fact, in this, we could probably make this rectus femoris just a little bit bigger through here to give the leg a little bit more width. And then the skin would go over all of this, which would add a little bit more thickness to the leg. Skin is pretty heavy. It's not just this thin sheet. It adds more weight and volume to the legs. This should also come over just a little bit farther through here. Plane break here instead of along here. I'm still not totally happy with this foot. Actually, I know why. What's going on over here is I push the pinky toe out too far. It should be in more within the foot. Yeah, that makes things a little bit more narrow in the design structure over here. And then take just a little bit more volume away from the outlines that are generated. And this is good to see, because when an outline gets too heavy, the shapes start to take on more form or more mass, and they slightly dip out of proportion. And we're trying to stop that proportion from growing too large, or else the legs are going to feel like they don't belong to the body. Well, I hope this helps you a little bit in learning how to take the information from the Bridgman book and instill it into the drawings that you're studying from. And by designing the muscles in this way, you'll really have a good memorization of their shape language that hopefully translates over into all the other work that you do. Thank you very much for watching, and be on the lookout for the final video of this series that has to do with the hands, and I'll see you later.
All right, well, I hope you found this information useful and it's helping you with your studies. Now, like I said, this particular part of the book is a little bit more complicated than a lot of the other sections. So if you're still confused by the information, in the description box below, please leave some information for me. What's still confusing and why is it confusing to you? Both of those will help me make another video that's even more comprehensive, and I'm more than happy to do that. Don't think that that's a burden on my part or your part. It is totally useful, because if something still seems complicated to you, it probably is to a lot of other people as well. And I don't want this stuff to be complicated. I want it to be very easy for you to understand. Now we have one more section to go in the Bridgman book, and that's on the hands. Look for that video. And I know that there's another section after that on drapery, but I'd like to leave that for a masterclass series with more up-to-date information. While the book is pretty good, and while the information is useful, we are more modernized in the language and how the anatomy of drapery works. So I'd rather, again, do this as a masterclass. Or you could take my CGMA class. I do teach drapery over there at that particular school. But the next series that I do on drapery will be a masterclass series. It won't be from this particular book. All right, well, that's it for this video. Thank you again for following along. Good luck with your studies, stay creative, and I'll see you soon. Take care.